Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So we'll look at a game between Komodo and Stoofvlees in the TCEC Season 19 Division Premier. In this game, Komodo was playing with the white pieces, Stoofvlees was playing with black, and in this time control it's actually 90 minutes each with a 10-second increment. So a long played game, and the opening book was as follows. It went d4 g6, e4 bishop g7, c4 d6 and knight c3, knight to f6, and we're getting into a king's Indian. And here now bishop d3, it was castles, knight ge2, knight c6, white castles followed by knight to h5, bishop c2, e5, and this was the end of the book moves. And I've posted loads of arrows over the board, but basically the plan for black is to play f5. I'll play knight to e7, f5, and white's plan is to play the moves like d5, b4, and just play c5 and try and crack open the queen side. So the first move that Komodo played was d5, attacking the knight, which actually jumped in to b4 and try and take off white's bishop. But Komodo just retreated it backwards. There was a5 to support the knight, followed by a3 to kick the knight away, and it dropped into a6. Stoofvlees' a5 was actually quite a good move because now it prevents white from playing b4. So instead, white secures the centre with f3 and has an amazing pawn chain. I'll post loads of arrows again. Just a nice triangular formation in the centre, very solid. And Stoofvlees now plays knight to c5, a very nice outpost for the knight. Again, a5 stops white from playing b4 and kicking the knight away. But if somehow white can support the rook, they will be managed to play b4 because then there's no tricks on the a file. So Komodo continued with bishop to e3, attacking the knight. There was f5, followed by e takes f5, and black played g takes f5, which makes a lot of sense. And now black has moves like f4 coming up, followed by queen g5, bishop h3 ideas. So black's got a nice attack possibly coming. So Komodo tries to secure his queen side though. Bishop c2, the queen supports the rook on a1, and now white's free to play b4. But Stoofvlees actually plays quite an interesting move, and it looks like it's a trap, a4. So this stops white from playing b4 because then en passant can be played. But if now white opts to play knight takes a4 for instance, then black can just take, and if bishop takes, thinking white's won a pawn, black can play f4, forcing white to retreat their bishop back, and now comes queen g5, threatening to play bishop h3, and if king h1, there's e4. And all of a sudden black's got tremendous pressure against white's position, with the bishop breaking down on b2, bishop coming into this square, and black has maybe moves like e3 coming up, or if white takes, then there's also moves like f3 coming up. So a4 seems like a bit of a trap. So for this reason, actually, Komodo preempts the attack by black and plays king to h1, gets off the g file, and Stoofvlees doesn't play f4, preparing moves like queen g5 as we saw, and bishop to h3. But luckily now the king is on h1, a much safer square. After f4 though, Komodo actually didn't retreat their bishop backwards, instead took the knight on c5, takes, and d takes c5 is played. Again, it's probably very tempting for Komodo to take this pawn with knight takes a4, and also threatening to take on c5. If queen e7, maybe d6, pawn takes d6, and knight to b6. So Komodo could have definitely gone in for this. And after rook b8, there's knight takes bishop, rook takes, and just bishop to e4. And I've highlighted the key squares here. Basically, all white wants to do is get an outpost on d5 with either the knight or the bishop, and to be fair, white's got a very pleasant game. So it's perfectly possible in this position for white to pick up the a4 pawn. However, Komodo went for the attack. Queen d3 first, threatening to take on h7, and e4 was now played to block the attack. Again, e4 sets actually a bit of a trap, because if you take with the pawn, then queen h4 is suddenly coming in, and black's plan here is to play bishop to e5, followed by f3. Now the best move given by Stockfish is actually g3 in this position, followed by pawn takes and rook takes f8, king takes f8, knight takes g3, and then bishop to e5, Queen f3 check and knight to f6, rook f1 and bishop to g4. And this is given as black as much better. So black's actually material down, but their pieces are so much more active, and white's king is actually looking a bit ropey here. For this reason, after e4 in the game, knight takes e4 was played by Komodo. Stoofvlees goes into the attack with queen h4, maybe threatening some knight to g3 ideas. However, white's got the two knights here defending this key square. So king g1 anyway by Komodo to get off the h-file. There's bishop f5 pinning the knight on e4, but queen d2 to unpin the queen. Bishop takes e4 was played, Komodo recaptured, and Stoofvlees tried to go in for the attack with rook a6, a rook lift, preparing moves like rook h6. So queen c2 was played though, a battery against h7, and for some reason Stoofvlees just ignored this and played queen to g5 in the game. So Komodo took a free pawn, bishop takes h7 check, king h8, the bishop retreated backwards, and rook b6 was played attacking b2. But I feel like Komodo is in complete command now of this position. Komodo just defended, and all of a sudden now the queen's also threatening to take a4. So it's a bit like Pac-Man at the moment, where white's just hoovering up pawns. Bishop e5 was played, so threatening rook g8, preparing queen takes g2. And now the king just went backwards to h1. There was rook h6, so this looks quite dangerous for white. But as we see now, Komodo's actually got it all under control. It was just h3, rook g8. So now, okay, black is threatening checkmate on g2. And this will look scary for a human player, but the computers are incredibly accurate. Rook g1 defends the pawn. There was queen h4. And now Komodo defends the h3 square, so there's no weird sacrifices coming up with bishop to f5. And if white can also manage to get the bishop to g4, they're probably doing quite well. This knight on e2 also does a great job of stopping any knight g3 check ideas. But black does try here, queen f2, threatening to take the knight on e2, following with knight to g3 check. So luckily here Komodo defends the knight, rook b to e1, and now there's rook to g5. So there are still some threats here of knight g3 coming in at some point, and also there's some weird sacrifices on h3 with the rook, as we'll see soon. So the queen e4 is played, attacks the bishop on e5, and knight to f6, a bit of a trap, as we'll see. So if white takes this bishop off, this is where the sacrifice comes in. This rook takes h3 with check, forcing white to take. And black can perpetual here with queen takes f3, king h2, queen f2, king h1, and that's a perpetual check. So these are the ideas that Komodo's got to watch out for. So after knight to f6, Komodo just retreats the queen backwards to d3, protects the f3 pawn. So there's no more queen takes f3. So for instance, if rook takes, pawn takes, there's no perpetual because the queen is defending that pawn. So after queen d3, knight to h5 was played, and here I think Komodo is actually quite safe. They just played bishop to g4, so now the g file is at least locked down from black. And in the game now, Stoofvlees took this off, rook takes g4. But again, Komodo has to be very careful. For instance, if f takes g4 now, black has f3. The point being is if queen takes f3, there's just knight g3 check. And if king h2, there's knight takes e2 with check, king h1, and all of a sudden black has an amazing position. If we just go back as well, after knight to g3, if instead white just plays knight takes, there's actually a rook h3 here, forcing white to take, and then queen takes f3, winning the queen. So if we go back a few more moves, if f takes g4 and then f3, the best move is actually just to play g takes h5, and then comes pawn takes pawn, rook takes, and queen takes e1, and white should now just play knight to g1. After rook to f6, queen e2, and a trade, white comes out of this okay, is actually 2 pawns up, in probably a 1 position, so this is probably what white should play. However, in the game after rook takes g4, Komodo played the best move, just played queen to f5. So attacking the rook and now attacking the bishop with check, and that's the key. Stoofvlees moved their rook h4. Komodo took the bishop with check. The king came to h7, and now it seems like Pac-Man, as I previously said. Komodo took the pawn on c7 with check. King went to g6. Queen c8, a very nice move, protects h3. King to g7, and now just d6. So preparing to push this pawn up, maybe get another queen. The queen can even take on b7 with check as well. In the game, Stoofvlees played rook to g6. Again, Pac-Man, queen takes b7 check. King went to h6. And Komodo played queen to a8. King went back to g7, and Komodo just pushed their pawn up to d7. Play continued on then with rook h6, but it feels like Black's attack is falling apart. Knight takes f4 was played, which sets a bit of a trap, because if Black takes f4, then rook e7 comes crashing in. For instance, king f6, there's queen f8, and mate will be swiftly delivered very soon. In the game then, Stoofvlees played knight to g3 check. King went to h2, knight went back to f5, but it seems like game over after queen to f8 check, king takes, white gets another queen with check, king went to f7, and Komodo seems to have this figured out. There's another check, king f6, rook e6 check, king went to g5, there was another check, knight to e7, queen takes the knight, king takes the knight, and then queen c7 check, king f5, and finally queen to e5 was checkmate. A very nicely played game by Komodo, surviving Stoofvlees' attack. It seems like Black overestimated their attack, and Komodo swiftly punished this. So that was quite a nice game by both engines, to be fair. So quite a harsh thumbnail that I've given this video. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do drop a like, comment or subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.